struck a deal on budget cuts and a raise for the debt ceiling. This came just 10 hours before the deadline, narrowly saving the country from defaulting on its debts. The world also heaved a sigh of relief as it escaped the huge aftermath of a U.S. default. However, the American economy still continues on an ailing path. This is a problem not just for the United States, but for the global economy as it ponders the likelihood of a double dip and economic recession following the implementation of fiscal austerity. The U.S. economy grew just 1.3% in the second quarter, falling short substantially of market expectations at 1.8%. The U.S. Department of Commerce also had to greatly revise its earlier growth figure for the first quarter from 1.9% to just 0.4%. Crisis in the U.S. economy continues to loom large over the fragile recovery of the global economy. On today's In Focus, we'll learn more about the state of the U.S. economy after its narrow escape from default and its implications for Korea.
The world heaved a sigh of relief as the United States saved itself from the default on its debts. The Congress passed a bill to raise its debt ceiling while making cuts to the budget. Although the crisis has been averted for now, there are still many lingering problems. The biggest fear is a recession caused by fiscal austerity, which could bring about a double dip in the global economy. Given the huge influence of the U.S., these woes are now far off for Korea as well. So join our experts as they discuss the future of the U.S. economy and its global repercussions. Today, we will discuss the economic crisis in USA and its implications on global economy. To discuss today's topic, we have two expert guests, the Professor Ho Chan-guk and then Professor Lee Do-won. Thank you for being with us today. Well, let's start our discussion. Well, actually, we heard that U.S. economy narrowly escaped default on its debt. Mm-hmm. So what is going on? What is happening in USA?
Well, it basically happened, the action that avoided the actual default happened early this week. Mm-hmm. Basically, U.S. government makes all sorts of payments according to the budget passed by Congress. Mm-hmm. But they basically ran out of money to pay mm-hmm. bills. Mm-hmm. So just like anyone else, they need to borrow if they're going to make payments, mm-hmm. all sorts of payments. To do that, they basically needed approval by Congress, authorization to borrow because the government hit the debt ceiling mm-hmm. authorized earlier. Mm-hmm. So they have to go beyond the earlier amount. Mm-hmm. So for that, administration needed approval by the Congress, and it was a very dramatic development. And both parties basically argued and waited until the last minute basically to pass the authorization. And along with it, plan to reduce the overall U.S. government deficit going forward. Mm-hmm. So, and conditional on that, they immediately raised the debt ceiling to by $2.1 trillion US dollars. So they avoided. So had they not get the authorization, then the U.S. government could not make all the payments coming due. Mm-hmm. So default came into picture because U.S. government has to pay interest on the previous borrowing. And if that's the item that U.S. government could not pay or choose not to pay, then that means default, basically. You are not paying, meeting obligation on your borrowing.
So maybe we will discuss about the American economy itself later, but well, we could understand what's happening right now in the USA. But many people are curious about the reason, you know. Many people know that the USA is a nation with the strongest sovereign credit in the world.
That's right.
So everybody's, I mean, many people are curious about how did the crisis come to be in the United States?
You know, this is a crisis that is not happening just today. This was a crisis that has been deteriorated over the last 2 or 3 decades. In fact, the origin of the crisis is the chronic and structural U.S. budget deficit. U.S. government has run the budget deficit from the early 1980s all the way until today. They had ups and downs, where in fact under the Clinton administration, they have recovered from the budget deficit and they have maintained budget balance only for a couple of years. But that's it. You know, after the junior Bush administration, the budget deficit problem got deteriorated again, mostly due to 2 reasons. One is tax cut, and the other one is the increased military spending on Afghanistan and Iraq. So that has deteriorated the U.S. Budget deficit problem. And as you suffer from budget deficit, it is very natural that you accumulate national debt.
I see.
So the national debt of the U.S. government is something like 93% of U.S. GDP by the end of 2010. That is slightly bigger than the average of the OECD national debt. And what made things really worse was the fiscal stimulus package introduced by the U.S. government in order to recover from the 2008 global financial crisis. They have introduced the so-called quantitative easing policy twice, and most of those policies included fiscal stimulus.
I see.
And that has increased government spending, and that's where they are right now.
If possible, I want to ask the question, you know, to sew up the depressed economy, USA government wanted to use the policy measures, you know, and but the bill which was passed by the USA Congress includes the spending cuts. So some people is really worried about that there will be they will have more serious consequences in USA economy. Can you can you explain about the about this question?
That's right. In fact, if this was a normal situation, normal ordinary situation, then U.S. government is supposed to spend even more in order to recover from the global financial crisis. And many economists in the U.S. are arguing for more spending, especially economists like Krugman. He is still arguing that this is not the time to cut the spending. This is the time to increase the spending even more. However, as Professor Ho already mentioned, U.S. government has reached the debt ceiling already. In order to borrow more, they had to agree on spending cut. That was the critical condition for more borrowing. So that is going to worrisome to the U.S. economy, which is still very weak and still struggling to recover from the crisis.
Actually, as far as I know, the USA government has raised the debt ceiling in the past. So I don't know why. Why was this? Why was there such a huge fuss this time? Is it quite different from the previous situations?
A couple of elements. First of all, the overall debt amount has increased drastically between 2008 and 2010 for obvious reason of the global financial crisis. U.S. government had to take care of a lot of things, the financial system and so forth. So spending really went up a lot in a short period of time. And economy was bad, so tax revenue wasn't growing. So all of those spending was basically done by borrowing. So that went up quite rapidly. The second element is the U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress, particularly the lower house, the House of Representatives, had many freshman congressmen, congresswomen elected last year who viewed their mandate to control the size and role of government, and they were very zealous. They were very some describe them as sort of extreme in their view in terms of trying to control government. And so, for example, one way to control government spending, the size of government, is to basically control the money purse of the government. If you don't have money, then you cannot spend, and you have to sort of shrink. That's the sort of the idea. And this time around, they want the majority of the Republican Party is the majority party in the House of Representatives. Within the Republican Party, those Tea Party affiliated congressmen, they are not majority, but they were very, very firm about demanding that the party, follow their sort of doctrine or their idea of controlling government. So it became a particularly onerous process. And there are fundamental reasons, of course, and one of the things is the sort of failure of the U.S. Congress as well as government since 1980s. During Clinton period, the budget situation, the debt situation was sort of came under control, but ever since it deteriorated and has gotten worse. And they basically failed to control the growth in expenditure, spending, and while they couldn't agree ways to increase the revenue. So this problem, homework that they didn't solve for a long time, sort of made the problem really worse this time around.
Well, Professor He, you mentioned about the bad shape of the U.S. economy. So I think it's needed for us to discuss about the current situation. I mean, current economy is in the USA. How about the U.S. economy? You mentioned very briefly already, but...
Well, U.S. economy is trying to recover from the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. In fact, in terms of the banking and capital market, they kind of recovered from the shocks of the crisis. However, it is the labor market still is very weak and still does not show a good sign of recovery. The unemployment rate has reached almost to the level of 10%, in 2009.
I see.
But even after U.S. economy recovered in terms of the growth rate in 2010, the unemployment rate still remained around 9%. And still it is hovering around 9%. And it's going to take a little bit more time to reduce the unemployment rate from the current level to the pre-crisis level of 6 or 7%. But even with this weak unemployment rate, U.S. government was trying to revitalize the economy in terms of consumption and investment. And that's why U.S. government needed to spend more. But as we agreed on increasing the debt ceiling on the condition that U.S. government will cut spending, that is going to be very difficult.
I see. So considering the current situation, I mean, economic situation in USA, the greatest fear, for the U.S. economy, actually that is the world global community. Right. I mean, the world is the possibility of double dip. So why is this possibility being raised at this moment?
Well, basically, there's no real bright spot when you look at the global economy.
Right.
Basically, U.S., not only this fiscal situation, the real economic recovery is still very weak. Unemployment rate in 9% range. That's historically very, very unusual. It rose from below 5% to 9%, 10%. No sign of things getting better. And this it makes picture worse because the other major economic bloc, which is Europe, is in their own fiscal financial crisis
yes.
situation. This is not new. This all started, I guess, starting in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2010. And when you look at it, and Japan is another major economy. Japan is relatively better, but it's not really doing well with the earthquake and whatnot. So when you look at the group of advanced economies, they are all in sort of weak, soft, troubled spots. And for example, there's almost a very sort of panic sell-off of equities and various financial assets this week, both in the U.S. and even in Korea. A lot of people in the market are saying that basically investors reassessing the outlook. That basically what it means is this time last year, the expectation was 1 year from now, there is 2010, economy will be recovering, for sure. It might not be real rapid one, but kind of sure-footed recovery. At that time, people expected to see unemployment rate coming down toward, 5%, the historic average level. It's not happening. On top of that, we have government fiscal problem. In Europe, there again, Greece and other countries, problems not really improving. And then you look at the China and East Asia region. These economies are doing relatively better, but what happens is they tend to rely on external demand, Korea included. People say it's good news. The export is growing. We have trade surplus. It's real, good news. China same way. But if the major market of U.S. and Europe are faltering, if they are not doing well, then obviously the exporting Asian countries, they're going to feel the pain down the road. So all around, when you look at global economy, it's hard to find real sort of bright spot. And sort of the investors this time around, it's not, they're describing it as not as a panic selling, but sort of cool-headed reassessment of the situation and say, well, things don't look good. It's not going to improve real soon. Better get out of this equity and whatnot. And that's taking place in large scale.
And maybe you can add something.
Yes, it is true that if you look at the situation of the global economy today, there are many gloomy aspects.
I see.
And many people think that the possibility of the double dip has increased due to the negative factors just mentioned by Professor He. However, at the same time, still the possibility of double dip is less than 50%.
50%?
That's the analysis made by the Larry Summers a couple of days ago. And Larry Summers, the former economic advisor to the U.S. president, wrote a column a couple of days ago in Financial Times. And he also made a lot of gloomy pictures. However, in conclusion, he said that the chances of getting into the double dip will be probably something like 1 in 3.
Okay. 1 in 3.
That's a great possibility. However, still less than 50%.
Yes.
We all agree that the possibility has been increased. But still, if we have to bet either on double dip or no double dip, still many people will bet on no double dip. But it is true that we have negative factors. However, depending on how we deal with these negative factors, many of things can be stabilized in the medium-term perspective. We all know that U.S. government is in trouble, but at least they reached the deal to increase the debt ceiling and avoided the default. And of course, depending on how they will deal with it in the future, U.S. government and U.S. economy will be different. Europe is in trouble, but they have barely escaped the default of the Greece and Ireland. And now Italy and Spain are in trouble. But nobody really think that Italy and Spain will actually default their debt. In one way or another, they will deal with it, probably with the help of Germany and France and the IMF and ECB. And it's too risky for the European Union to allow Italy and Spain to default on their debt. It's going to take time and money, but I really do not think that they will break down the European Union's integrations. Emerging market, China and Brazil, including South Korea, we depend on the export. That's true. However, Chinese government is driving very radically in order to divert their economy from export dependence economy into domestic demand dependence economy. If that drive is successful, then we can find new growth engine in these emerging markets.
I see.
Of course, all of these ifs are big ifs, and we have to see. But I'm a very naturally inborn optimistic guy. I'm trying to find bright spots from the gloomy aspects.
I like it.
I hope you're right.
Yes. Well, like the coin, which has two sides, I think everything has two sides, the good thing and bad thing. I know that it's not easy to take the black and white approaches in analyzing economic situations, but I hope to see the improvement of the global economy. Well, I'd like to discuss more about the direction of the change of the U.S. economy. I think that U.S. economy will change, is going to change, but the question is in what direction? So even though both of you mentioned very briefly about the American the economy and then the situations of American economy, but I want to share your the insights about the future. The direction of the USA economy. Could you tell us more about
Well, U.S. economy has a very deep-seated underlying strengths in terms of entrepreneurship and lots of high-tech knowledge and openness and open market and so forth. So it'll recover eventually, but it's the matter of near-term outlook. And the government spending is going to be cut. There's no question about it, and it's basically you cannot expect help from fiscal policy side in terms of increasing spending or reduction in tax and so forth. So in terms of policy, what it can do is monetary policy can be relied upon a bit. In that regard, one worrying possibility is that we are seeing sort of replay of 2010 currency war.
I see.
If you recall that ahead of the time of G20 in Seoul, that was big topic. And this time around, what's happening is financial market globally is very, very unstable. So money is flowing into places where they regard it safe, which is Switzerland, which is Japan, gold. And what happened was the exchange rate value of Swiss franc went up a lot. So that's really burden for Swiss exporters. So recently, Swiss Central Bank lowered interest rate to discourage the inflow of money to basically defend the exchange rate. And a couple of days ago, Japan intervened in the foreign exchange market to sort of weaken the yen, Japanese yen, that's been strengthening quite a bit. So what we are seeing is sort of replay of countries, wanting to rely on outside demand to support domestic economy. And some observers are raising possibility that U.S. probably go down the same road in terms of increase my supply, reduce the value of U.S. dollar.
Oh, but by the way, I mean, can I interrupt you? Well, several days ago, the U.S. stock market,
Right.
well, was hit by some shock crisis. Well, what do you think about this? Is a kind of the consequences created or resulted by the USA policy measures?
Well, it's as I mentioned, it's sort of cool-headed reassessment that corporate income, people, the stock prices reflect expected corporate income in the future.
Right.
If income you expect to grow a lot, then you want to buy it, and the price will go up. Well, people are saying, look, corporate income is not going to grow as much as we expected.
So
a lot of people expected a very robust increase. It's not going to happen soon. So basically people decided, well, maybe let's get out and perhaps wait on the sideline for a while.
I see.
So that's a sort of market's assessment of the near-term economic outlook.
I see. Well, I would like to ask the final question to Professor Lee Do-won. And actually, the economic crisis in the USA spills problems to other countries. Well, Korea is not exception. So I think that Korean Korean government should have to prepare something, to minimize the shock coming from the USA. Could you tell us about it?
Well, yes. But first of all, there's really not much that we can do about the U.S. government problem. It is the problem caused by the U.S. government.
Right.
It's the problem that has to be dealt by the U.S. government. So, but within the limited policy options, at least we can predict that the demand from the U.S. and Europe will be weakened in the medium and long-term perspective. And that is not exactly a bad thing in the sense that they need to deleverage their debt problems. Unless the U.S. government resolves this debt problem, we cannot expect robust global economic recovery. It's going to take time, but it's better for them to deal with it right now than they do in the future. But in the process of it, we can expect the U.S. dollar is going to be weakened. And relatively speaking, Korean won and a lot of other currencies in the emerging market will be appreciated.
I see.
You already mentioned that that's going to be a problem to the Korean economy. So we have to prepare for it. But as our currencies get appreciated, our export competitiveness will be weakened. And that is why we really have to pay more attention to the domestic investment and domestic consumption. This is the right time to really boost up our domestic demand economy, including especially service industries of Korea. The service industry of Korea had great potentials of growth, but that potential has never been materialized so far. And it is mostly due to a lot of regulations and protection policies of the previous government. But now it's time that we really have to deal with these regulations.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Ho Chang-guk and Professor Lee Do-won. We had a very productive discussion. Well, today we discussed about the economic crisis happening in USA and its implications on global economy. And through the discussion, we found it out that, the economic crisis in USA gives us many questions to which we have to find answers. Well, thank you very much. And then this has been Shin Sang-yeol for In Focus, and see you next time.